I'm very pleased to introduce Maria's story tonight. Maria's story started birding in 2016 and credits Frederick Ruckersfeld for getting her started. Her first birding trip was to Terry Trueblood. She has attended several IOU meetings and as many of the Iowa City Bird Club field trips as possible. She has now advanced to adventure travel and sees birds and wildlife. Professionally, Maria graduated medical school at University of Iowa in 2014. She completed residency in internal medicine in 2017 and nephrology, I messed that up, sorry, fellowship in 2021. She now practices nephrology, I'm admitting somebody, and hypertension at Southeast Iowa Regional Medical Center in Burlington, Iowa. And she is going to treat us to her adventures.
Maybe I'll go ahead and get started. So I have two trips to talk about tonight, but I think as I was putting together the presentation that I'm really just going to probably have time to talk about the Antarctica trip without rushing through both of these. So I maybe can come back and talk about the Arctic trip more at another date, but right now I'll focus on Antarctica. And if we make it through the whole trip and there's time, I can talk about the Arctic one. Please do ask questions throughout the presentation. There we go. So the Antarctica trip was just about a year ago. It was called Antarctica Awakening, and it visited the Falkland Islands, South Georgia, and Antarctica. This was an expedition cruise with Poseidon Expeditions on the ship, the Sea Spirit, and I've listed the website there. And what an expedition cruise is that it's not your typical cruise, meaning that there's no like onboard entertainment that you would think of. There's no gambling, there's no shows. The expedition part really means we're not sure what's going to happen every day. They have a rough or expected itinerary, but things can change quickly based on the weather, especially in the Southern Ocean and Antarctica. So the guides emphasize continually to us that we needed to be flexible in kind of our hopes and anticipations for the trip. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward, the cruising. This is the information about the Arctic trip, but I'll come back to that if we have time. So Brian and I flew to Buenos Aires in Argentina and departed on the trip, and you can see the skyline in the back there. And I'm just going to try to change the camera here because I know that it's, I guess, are people seeing me? There. Nope.
We see both you and Ryan.
Both me and Ryan, but are you seeing my video or no?
I'm seeing your slides as the main thing, and then just your video as a little floating head.
Okay, there we go. I just wanted to change. Thank you. There we go. Okay. So we departed Buenos Aires on the Sea Spirit. The Sea Spirit is a ship that carries about 115 passengers or so. There was about 90 crew members. Of the 90 crew members, approximately 12 to 13 were guides. And the guides are all pretty well-trained folks. They came from a lot of different backgrounds. There were several translators on the trip. This trip was offered in 3 languages. It was offered in English, German, and Mandarin. So there were German-speaking guides, Mandarin-speaking guides, and then, of course, English-speaking guides. Some of the folks had pretty strong backgrounds in logistics and had worked in different Antarctica research bases over the years. And then other people had been professional guides for 20-something years. So it was a mixed group of guides. And then this is the outline of the trip. So starting in Buenos Aires and sailing to the Falkland Islands, this portion of the trip took about 3.5 days. It was fairly smooth sailing. Then we went from the Falkland Islands down to South Georgia. And maybe some of you know this, but I didn't know this going into the trip. Argentina and Antarctica used to be connected, and as the continents have slowly drifted apart from each other, these two land masses have separated, and South Georgia actually is part of the same mountain range as the Andes Mountains and the Antarctic Peninsula. And there's a tectonic plate kind of right in this region. And the tectonic plate is moving to the east. So South Georgia is moving to the east over time, while Argentina and South America were moving north, and Antarctica is moving south. So the reason that that becomes important is that there are some similar birds in South Georgia as there are in Argentina, which is quite interesting. Then we sailed from South Georgia to the Antarctic Peninsula. We did have a stop in the South Shetland Islands before returning to Ushuaia. In total, the trip was 23 days. I would say it was about 22 full days, as we didn't depart from Buenos Aires until maybe 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And we got back to Ushuaia maybe 7 or 8 in the morning. So lots of seabirds, of course, are pelagic birds. It took me a couple of days to figure out how to work the camera well enough in order to get some pictures. I probably took 600 or 800 pictures before figuring out I needed to use a faster shutter speed. So my first day photos were not very good, but this is a Cape Petrel. This is a black-browed albatross, and then the southern giant petrel. There was also a lot of really, really small birds. My biggest lens is a 400 millimeter lens, so I didn't try to get pictures of the small birds because I knew I just wasn't going to get good photos. And just as a quick note, I have labeled things going left to right throughout the presentation in terms of the names of the birds. I think the Cape Petrels ended up being some of our favorite birds because they stayed with the ship pretty much the whole way through the trip. I don't know, of course, if it was the same birds or different birds, but they're incredible gliders. They rarely flap. They use the wind energy related to the waves to constantly be gliding right along or behind the ship. It was definitely pretty neat getting to see the albatross because this was my first time seeing pelagic birds. Just a little bit of discussion about something called biosecurity. So Poseidon Expeditions and the Sea Spirit are members of IATO, which is the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators. From my understanding, this is a voluntary organization to be a member of, but most or perhaps all tour operators are members of it, and they abide by regulations that have been set forth to basically protect these very, very sensitive habitats, because you have people from all around the world traveling on these ships and with the potential to introduce non-native species to the Falkland Islands into South Georgia. And as some of you likely know, that has already happened over the years, specifically with mice and rats in South Georgia that came from whaling ships in the 1800s. And it's, which then was very detrimental to the local birds because the rats and mice ate the eggs. Just recently, in the last 2 to 3 years, there's been a complete extermination of the rats on South Georgia Island, and the native bird populations have been rebounding fairly well. So there are strict regulations to reduce contamination of all biological materials between the landing sites. And this includes grass, seeds, and plant materials, microbes, fungi, and soil materials. So in the instructions prior to even coming on the ship, we were instructed to make sure that all coats, pants, boots, and shoes were clean, and free of any dirt or contamination. And this was just for our own clothes that we were bringing with us. Once we got out into the Southern Ocean, we did what was called this biosecurity cleaning. So every floor, there were 6 floors to the ship, and every floor had to come down to the main kind of meeting area. And our guides looked through all the coats and all of our shoes very carefully to make sure that there was no grass seeds, soil, etc. Once they had carefully looked through all of the clothing items, including, I guess, gloves, hats, scarves, anything that would have contact with the outside world. So they didn't want like our long underwear or anything like that. But then we had to go through a pretty strict boot cleaning process. The boots were provided, they were really nice muck boot type boots with thick soles. And those boots had to be cleaned very carefully using some cleaning solutions that they set up on one of the decks of the ship. And we actually had to do this between the Falkland Islands and then South Georgia, Antarctica, and before coming back to Ushuaia. So we did it in total about 4 to 5 times through the whole trip. And then each time we returned from the ship from a landing site, we also had to walk through the clean solution and check our boots. So that was one really good thing, that the company was very concerned with following these regulations, and they held everyone to a very high standard. So after about 3 or 3.5 days of crossing the southern, we arrived in the Falkland Islands. We had 2 landing points, West Point and Saunders Island. The photo down here is sunrise approaching the Falkland Islands. This is West Point, and these folks here in this little home are caretakers of a property. And on their property over here, there's a steep cliff, and this cliff is a roosting site for rock-copper penguins and the black-browed albatross. So we had approximately a 1-mile walk, maybe a little bit less, from the home here to this roost site on these cliffs over here. And on our walk, we saw a striated caracara, which is a type of falcon that tends to stay fairly low to the ground. And then we also saw this long-tailed meadowlark. And I realized that this is kind of far away, and unfortunately, I didn't have a great lens, and it's a small bird, but I love that bright red breast. The caracaras, I really was very intrigued with them. They're very curious birds. I was actually fairly close to the bird here, and there was a number of other folks taking pictures, and it seemed completely unperturbed by random people in red coats staring at it. And as you can see, it is banded as well. So here's a rock-copper penguin and the black-browed albatross. I also should say, on an expedition cruise, there are educational lectures on the sea days mainly. And one of the lectures was talking about the life cycle of the albatross. So this pile of mud here is the nest, and the albatross was sitting on an egg there. Interestingly, if the chick, for whatever reason, falls out of the nest, the albatross does not recognize it and will stop feeding it. They typically only raise 1 chick per year, and they're very long-lived birds, and they don't start reproducing until, I believe, around age 4. So losing a chick is actually a pretty big deal and can affect the population a lot. Predators, of course, will come and try to eat the chicks, or if it's just extremely windy, the chick might fall out of the nest. So really interesting, really fun walk. At this point, the temperature was probably around 45 degrees, and it was fairly windy, but we were pretty comfortable. We also saw a dark-faced ground tyrant, which you can see up here. It was bathing in a little stream, and I was pleased to catch the little water droplets. This is an upland goose. And then a gray-headed albatross was sitting on the cliffside mixed in with these black-browed albatross. And these guys are more uncommon than the black-browed albatross, so that was fun to see. We moved on to Saunders Island in the afternoon of the trip, and had really awesome time walking around this small area, watching gentoo penguins. As you can see, I got some great reflections in here. This is one of my favorite pictures because the penguins are just coming in from the ocean, and the lady is standing back here. We also saw Magellanic penguins, which my little screen here, right here. So the gentoo penguins nest on sandy hills, and the Magellanic penguins nest a little bit higher up in more grassy areas by burrowing, more like a Humboldt penguin. So I don't have a picture of the burrow, but somewhere back here in the hills, this would have been dug out. They were just beginning their nesting season, so we didn't see any chicks because we did go basically at the springtime of Antarctica, or this trip was in the springtime. These guys are actually king penguin chicks, and these chicks are a year old. So we saw king penguins as well at this site, and then we saw these big fluffy brown chicks, which are obviously very cute. In our second day in the Falkland Islands, we stopped in the town of Stanley. The Falkland Islands, for those that don't know, are a British overseas territory and have been under British control or possession, I guess, since approximately the mid 1800s. We did have a talk about the history of the Falkland Islands, and it's been, quote, discovered various times by different countries. I believe the Portuguese occupied this archipelago for a number of years, the British, the French, and then it was abandoned, and then the British kind of reclaimed the territory. We were educated by the guides and by the staff that Argentina also claims ownership, I guess, of the Falkland Islands. And in the early 1980s, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands and tried to take possession, and they were defeated. There's a nice little museum in town that goes through that history. In the Falkland Islands, there's about 4,500 people, and most of those folks live in Stanley, which is the capital town, and which you see there in the back. Fishing, farming, and tourism are the main industries. And the folks who live in the Falkland Islands completed a survey sometime within the last 5 to 10 years, asking them basically, like, do you identify as British or do you identify as Argentinian? And like 99% of people identified as British. So it continues to be a dispute amongst Argentina, but the people there do very strongly feel that they are British. This little structure here is called the whalebone arch. This was actually made from whale bones sometime in the distant past, and over time those bones have become weathered and were structurally not sound anymore, so it's been replaced with synthetic whale bones. And then this is a Christchurch Cathedral right there on the main strip downtown. It's a fairly small town. And as I noted, fishing, farming, and tourism are the main industries, and farming would be sheep farming or sheep rearing, I suppose. So we actually were delayed in the Falkland Islands for an additional day due to a strong storm crossing the Southern Ocean. And it would have been nice to have an extra day in South Georgia, but this is what happens when you do an expedition cruise to remote parts of the world, is sometimes the weather holds you up. There was 80 to 90 mile an hour winds and large waves. And so the captain, along with the guides, decided it would not be comfortable and potentially unsafe to be traveling in those conditions. So we basically had a day of sitting in Stanley, but we stayed on the ship because there wasn't really much else to do. They had tried to arrange for some excursions for us, but because of the extreme winds, we stayed indoors. The trip from Falkland Islands to South Georgia was fairly rough. There was 20 to 25 foot waves at times. So a lot of folks took their anti-nausea medications and snoozed through that trip, but they did provide various educational offerings over those few days. But eventually we made it to South Georgia, and it is getting colder. And as you might be able to see here, there's actually some snowflakes in the air. You can see them. And this is coming into that northern point of South Georgia and a large glacier right there. Our first stop was in Fortuna Bay, and these are photos of southern elephant seals and Antarctic fur seals. And I'm going to move my camera over again. This is a fur seal. This is a fur seal. This is an elephant seal. This is an elephant seal. As many may know, there was a lot of whaling and sealing that was done in South Georgia and around South Georgia. And so the populations of these animals were severely threatened. I believe most of that whaling ended around the 1860s, partially because it was getting difficult to find more animals because so many of them had been killed, and same for the fur seals. And at least for the seals, the populations have rebounded and are now healthy. There was tons of king penguins at Fortuna Bay, which was just amazing. There was a late spring snow happening, and you can see we had beautiful, huge snowflakes here. We took a lot of pictures of king penguins. I can't remember how many exactly were in this colony, but it was thousands. Our next stop in South Georgia was a place called Jason Harbor. We didn't see many penguins at this place, but probably the most interesting part was this tussock grass. So this is very thick, dense, large grass that animals like to hide in, including the seals. You can see here that there's a rainbow in the background. We saw the yellow-billed pintail, which is very similar to one of the ducks on the South American mainland. This is an Antarctic tern. And then the South Georgia pipit, which is an endemic species, and which its populations were severely decreased by the rats and mice. And as I mentioned earlier, there was multiple years of extermination efforts. And basically what happened was that poison was laid out for the rats, and over time, all of the rats were killed. And then these pipits, which are probably the size of a large sparrow to maybe a small robin, their populations have actually been improving. So that's been a conservation success story. Our next stop was Grytviken. This was an old whaling station that's now been converted into a research base. There is a lot of history here as well. So these large ships that are just rusting out because they've been left here sort of form an outdoor museum. You can see here that there's a harpoon gun, which was used for harpooning and killing the whales. And then the whales would be dragged back to the station here and processed. There was large boilers and areas where the whales were cut up and boiled down, and then the oil was taken off to Europe and America and other places. So it was quite gruesome to hear that history, but we are glad that we heard about it. In the background here, you can see our ship, the Sea Spirit, back there. I like this picture just because it they had a little mailbox here, so I was off sending some mail, and it says 54 degrees south and 36 degrees west. There is also a little church in case the rowdy whalers did want to worship on Sundays, although according to what we learned, it was not a very popular place to spend time. And then this is the grave of Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton, who was a famous Antarctic explorer. And there were several talks about him and his life as well during the course of the trip. St. Andrews Bay. So after Grytviken, we tried to land at St. Andrews Bay for approximately 6 hours. We were supposed to have a landing after lunch, so maybe 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But the winds were extremely high. They're called katabatic winds, and they basically form because of pressure and temperature differences between the tops of the glaciers, which is up here, and then kind of the lower areas over the water. And so you get these extremely strong winds just rushing down the glacier. So there's a glacier here, there's a glacier here, and then this is also a glacier. And so our captain and our lead guide, Anya, continually were evaluating the weather. Everybody was geared up and ready to go for about 2 hours. And finally, the team decided that we were going to overheat, and they asked us to undress, and they put together a presentation. I think they did have a number of these presentations on hand for times when we couldn't get out on the landings. And so it seemed like we weren't going to be able to make this landing. And then at approximately 6 p.m., the winds suddenly calmed down and we were able to get out, which was just really amazing because, as you can see, we had a beautiful sunset. This penguin colony was again, king penguin colony was again, thousands of animals. And just being able to walk around and experience that was incredible. And the colors were so rich and warm and beautiful. So this was definitely a really memorable landing, especially because for the longest time, we thought it wasn't going to happen because of these high winds. This guy here is a male southern elephant seal. A few words about them is that the seals spend most of their life, well, about 8 months of the year at sea, and then they come on the land to mate. And so this male will mate with anywhere from approximately 6 to 10 females, and he will spend his mating season on the beach. They call him the beach master, and he will try to defend his females from any other approaching males. And so they'll often get into fights, and you can see here that he's got some scars or scrapes there on his back. I guess I should make a comment about animal safety and person safety too. The guides were there for educational purposes, but also for safety, and they had pretty strict rules and requirements about not getting too close to the animals, both, again, for our safety and their safety. So that was well enforced throughout the whole trip, and thankfully there were no incidents. But I really like that picture too, because I don't know, it's just a good picture. So the next day we continued eastward through South Georgia. So we're kind of coming around that northern side and heading east. We went to Cooper's Bay, and this was a Zodiac cruise. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Zodiac cruises later on. There wasn't a really good landing site because, as you can kind of see here, it's fairly steep and fairly rocky along this bay. But we did see the macaroni penguins, snowy sheathbills, and then snow petrels flying around. And it's an interesting thing about weather in these parts too, is that here it's clear, fairly clear and fairly sunny. Coming out of this bay and turning a corner and going into the next one, which was the Drygalski Fjord, that was next on the agenda, but it was aborted due to high winds and poor visibility. So even though it was nice and clear here, maybe 1 to 2 miles away in a different fjord, it was sleeting and the winds were very high, and the captain made the decision not to go into the fjord any further because there wouldn't be much to see. In addition, that strong storm that we battled getting from the Falkland Islands to South Georgia was continuing, and the captain was anticipating that it would take longer than hoped to get down to Antarctica. Typically, on these South Georgia cruises, they'll come around the southern point of South Georgia and then head straight to the Antarctic Peninsula. We actually ended up backtracking all the way north and then heading west along the top of South Georgia and then heading to the Antarctic Peninsula because of really high waves. At one point on the crossing, we woke up and found ourselves using paper napkins for breakfast, which wasn't a problem, but we had always had cloth napkins. And we were informed that the laundry services were temporarily suspended because the laundry is in the front of the boat, and the incredible rocking was making it unsafe and impossible to run the laundry machines because of how much the boat was going up and down. The ship was going up and down with the waves. So thankfully that only lasted about 24 hours. So just a few notes about the Sea Spirit. As you can see, here's the vessel. And the back deck here, this is actually a crane. And then these black things are the Zodiacs. And the Zodiacs are inflatable boats that we used for the landings because really none of these locations had a suitable port for the ship to pull into other than Stanley in the Falkland Islands. And so that's the back there. And yeah, lifeboats up here, and then kind of satellite and weather equipment all the way at the top. This deck here was deck 5, and there's an awning there with some heat lamps. And we spent quite a bit of time outside on deck 5, just enjoying the view, watching the seabirds, or otherwise being outdoors. We were in there was plenty of food always at every meal. They had a really nice breakfast buffet every morning, a really nice lunch buffet with many different choices. In case you were feeling a little bit peckish in the afternoon, between about 4 and 5, they had small sandwiches, cakes. These are like little muffins and eclairs and other things. And then dinner was typically between 7 to 8 p.m. And that was a plated dinner with usually about 5 to 6 options for meals. So there was plenty of food, and we enjoyed eating all of it. Other activities on the Sea Spirit, in addition to the lectures, as mentioned several times, was a knot tying class. And then I do have to include the picture here of the polar plunge, which I completed in Antarctica. My husband Ryan was coming down the stairs right behind me. So that was an opportunity we had as well. I believe about 25 to 30% of the passengers did end up doing the polar plunge. So yeah, it was one of those things that I really wanted to do, and it was very cold and over fairly quickly. And I was surprised I actually warmed up pretty quickly with that. So all right, so we're now approaching Antarctica, and we were treated to huge icebergs from the Weddell Sea that were floating by as we were coming into the Antarctic Peninsula. On that west side of the peninsula, we were crossing kind of over the Weddell Sea, and there's huge icebergs and frozen sea ice there that we were able to see. Some of these icebergs were over a half a mile in radius. So this is some of the good things and some of the bad things about expedition travel. This location is called Brown Bluff. It's the northernmost point on the Antarctic Peninsula. These brown formations were formed from volcanic activities millions of years ago. There's an Adelie penguin colony right along here where there would have been thousands or maybe tens of thousands of Adelie penguins. We were supposed to land at this beautiful site. And again, unfortunately, these katabatic winds thwarted our plans. And so we were not able to land and spent probably about 4 hours just idling here, waiting for these winds to fall down or to calm down. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. Eventually, the captain made the decision to move on, and we took a slow cruise through these icebergs before heading further south to our next location, which was Portal Point. So in contrast to yesterday, when there was these really strong winds on the Portal Point day, the ocean was extremely calm. Some of the guests were really hopeful to actually make a landing on the actual continent of Antarctica and not just one of the outlying Antarctic islands, such as the South Shetland Island. Again, the guides discussed multiple times that nothing was guaranteed, but they would do our best. But to some of the guests, it was very important. For Ryan and I, we were just very thankful to be down there in the first place, and we didn't have strong feelings. But we did actually land on the continent of Antarctica. I sort of think of it as like stepping on the very tip of the peninsula of Florida, or maybe the Florida Keys. Like we're just seeing a tiny, tiny fraction of the whole continent, but we did make it onto the continent. You can see in this photo the crane operating one of the Zodiacs, and then they actually have some kayaks on top of that Zodiac, and they're getting ready to deploy the kayaks. Kayaking was an extra approximately $1,200 per person, and so we elected not to do that. But the people who did the kayaking really enjoyed it. Also, there was beautiful, beautiful snow on this day, and we had an amazing cruise, Zodiac cruise through the icebergs here. If you look carefully, you can see down here, there's some white material underneath the ocean. That's actually the ocean floor. It's not terribly deep there, maybe like 12 to 15 feet, but the water is so clear that you can see right down. In terms of the actual landing, we walked in a big circle through the snow, and this is a picture of various guests walking on the continent of Antarctica. So a little bit of a comment about the Zodiac cruising. We did 2 Zodiac cruises on the trip. One was in Cooper's Bay in South Georgia, and I've got a photo of southern elephant seal here. The other one was at Portal Point in Wilhelmina Bay in Antarctica, and I've got a photo of a krill here. One of the guides reached into the water and saw that small krill and pulled it up so we could take a look at it. The Zodiac cruising was really neat. It was fun to be able to walk around on the land and get close-up photographs of the animals. But one of Ryan and my favorite activities was definitely doing the cruise through the icebergs. You can see really far down into the water, as I mentioned, and the ice is such an incredible, beautiful blue color, which you can see right here. I also should mention that these photos are not color enhanced at all. So the colors you're seeing are the actual colors. And that was just a really special and unique event. Unfortunately, it's getting towards the end of the trip, so we're starting to head back north. We stopped on Half Moon Island in the South Shetland Islands to observe a chinstrap penguin colony. As you can see in this photo, this is fairly rocky here, and it was fairly steep, and the chinstrap penguins nest at the top of these steep hills, and so they were moving between the ocean and the top of these steep hills. There's still a lot of snow on the ground here, so they weren't quite ready to start laying eggs, but they were just coming in from approximately 8 months of being at sea and kind of getting settled in, finding their mates, etc. This is also one of my favorite pictures of the trip because there was folks on one side here and then some other folks on my side where I was standing, kind of making a tunnel, and these 2 penguins just continued to hop across all the people. The chinstrap penguins and the gentooth penguins were definitely really fun to watch and to listen to. So then we start heading back north through the Drake Passage. The Drake Passage traditionally is known for being very rough, but we actually had a very smooth crossing, especially compared to the crossing near South Georgia, which was pretty rough. So we arrived a little bit early and spent a few hours near Cape Horn in Chile, which is right here. This was the photo of all the passengers and the guests on the trip. And then early in the morning on the final day of the trip, we pull into the port of Ushuaia, Argentina, which is at the very southern part of South America. Ryan and I had made plans to spend the day in Tierra del Fuego National Park, and we did hire a bird guide and had the opportunity to see several different bird species. I didn't include pictures of every single one, but I included pictures of some of the, I don't know, probably the ones that I had better pictures of. So we were able to see the Magellanic woodpecker, which is similar in size to the pileated woodpecker in the United States. This is a Chamongo caracara, similar to the striated caracara that we saw at the Falkland Islands, a black-necked swan, the tufted tit tyrant, the crested caracara, and then a house wren up here. The funny thing about this crested caracara is we were having a little picnic here by the creek, and there was actually a little boy and his parents. He's probably like 1.5 or 2 years old, eating some sandwiches. And this bird was, he knew who to look for food. So this guy was hanging around pretty closely to that little boy and his family, and eventually moved away when he realized he wasn't going to get a bite of the sandwich. But this is a very beautiful bird, and I was very happy to get to see it. So overall thoughts about the trip. We would give this trip 5 stars. This was just an incredible experience and opportunity to be able to do, especially at a relatively young age. We really enjoyed the time on the Sea Spirit and Poseidon expeditions. They had a very high degree of safety for the crew and for all of the passengers. And there were times when we couldn't make a landing, but it was always clear that the team made the safe and smart decision. In addition, the hotel staff and the wait staff in the dining area had wonderful hospitality, and we felt ourselves kind of becoming friends with some of the servers towards the end of the trip. The landing sites were absolutely amazing, and we spent the maximum time possible on the land. I should make a little bit of a comment about this as well. So there's a lot of different cruise ships in terms of size that go to South Georgia, Falklands, and Antarctica. Because of this IATO, the International Association of Tour Operators, there's regulations about how much time each ship can spend at each landing site in order to help preserve the environment and not cause undue problems for the animals. So larger ships with more passengers mean that more people need to get on the land at this at a time, and there's a limit of 100 passengers at a time on each of the landing sites. So if you have a ship with 500 people, everyone needs to get on the land in approximately 3 hours or so. So you might only have 45 minutes. We went with a small ship, so each landing time was approximately 3 hours, which was as long as possible. The onboard lectures were interesting and very engaging and educational. They were given on a wide variety of topics, including geography, marine interest, animals, birds, history, and many other topics. As I mentioned above, small ship, kind of more personalized experience. We were able to know the staff and the guides a little bit better. I will just say, though, that this was a fairly long trip, and we spent a lot of days at sea. We spent 14 out of 21 days at sea and only 7 out of 21 days on land. And of those 7 days that we were on land or had a landing, which I would include the Zodiac tours as that, we were generally out for about 3 hours per landing, maybe 3.5 hours. So when you think about it, you're spending a very, very large amount of time to have a very small amount of time on land. But despite that, it was still absolutely amazing. And we would definitely go again. I did just put the cost in there. The kind of cheapest cost would be about $15,000 per person for a double cabin. If you wanted a triple cabin, you could probably get the cost down to $12,000 to $13,000. Again, these were prices for last year. There are cheaper cruise options out there, but they're generally going to have many more passengers. So we decided that since we were traveling all this way, we wanted to have the maximum amount of time on land possible. And so we decided for us that a small ship was the way to go. I'm going to actually stop there because it is 7:50 already. I knew that that was going to take a while. And see if people have any questions or anything to discuss. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it through my Arctic trip this evening, but I will work with the Iowa City Bird Club to get that scheduled for sometime in the spring if folks are interested in hearing about that. That was a quite different trip from this Antarctica trip. So thank you.
Thank you, Maria. If anybody has questions, you can just unmute yourself and ask.
So Maria, I know you mentioned on South Georgia that there'd been a successful effort to remove the mice and I guess rats and mice primarily. I remember reading, this is more of a comment than a question, but a short article several years ago about it. That was a really impressive thing. I want to say the article said it took about 10 years or more, and they scattered the poison in the valleys. It was the advantage was the rats can't cross from between valleys, so they could go valley by valley and exterminated these introduced predators. And finally, I think like 2021 or so, they brought sniffer dogs into the island and covered the whole thing. You probably heard about this in a lecture or something, but and the dogs couldn't find any, so they think they've got complete eradication. And it really takes a lot of effort, but I think this is being done here and there on other islands, where if you can get that accomplished, you can start seeing the reestablishment of the species. And apparently you did see that.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you. So yeah, absolutely. The rats couldn't cross between the valleys because there were glaciers. So that's correct. And they did basically use helicopters to spread out rat poison. I don't remember exactly how that poison was formulated, but they did formulate it in such a way that it would either only attract rats or poison rats, because they didn't want any other species to be affected. But to my knowledge, there's no other small mammals that would be up that high. Like seals wouldn't be up, several hundred feet above the sea level. So yes, and it did take a long time, and it has been successful. And I was recently reading a book on bird migration, and that same strategy is being attempted in some other islands, like the Aleutian Islands off of Alaska and other places where there are introduced rats and predators. The big thing, though, as you mentioned, is just coming back year after year after year to make sure that those eradication efforts continue to be successful. So thank you. It was really interesting and awesome to hear that, because a lot of times we hear bad news with global warming and conservation, but this was definitely a success story.
Hi, Maria. This is Brian. I had a question.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this, by the way. And did you add up how many bird species you saw on the whole trip?
I did at one point, but I don't remember now. Come on. I know, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sure the quality is way more important than quantity, but just the rarity and other things. So.
Yeah, I'm guessing it maybe was like 50 species or something, because we saw huge numbers of penguins, of course, but we didn't see a lot of a lot of different diversity. Also, some of the people on the trip were like really, really, really good birders, and they were out all the time trying to find like this little pelagic bird or that little pelagic bird. I unfortunately can't put myself into that category quite yet. So I saw some little black things floating out over the ocean. I was kind of like, okay, cool. So I probably could have gotten more species. That's what I'm trying to say, but I didn't.
Okay.
Maria, that leads me into the question, did you see any prions?
So those are the little ones that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I discovered this family, I guess you'd call it, of prions, which are really interesting because they're down in the Southern Ocean, and I think they rarely come to land, and that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, we did see some prions. Yeah, the other cool thing about this type of trip is that so there was an ornithologist on board. He was one of the guides, and it was up to him to keep species list each day. And so there was a very large checklist that included mammals and whales and seals, and then the birds, of course. And so each day, as different animals were sighted, at the end of the day, the checklist would be updated. At the end of the trip, all of that was turned into a PDF checklist. So I do have a checklist, and I could go back day by day and figure out exactly what was seen. Now, whether I saw it or not is a different story. I guess I should also make a comment about the whales. So we did see some whales, but most, so the plankton was just starting to bloom in Antarctica because it was still quite cold and it was still in the spring. So there wasn't a lot of the phytoplanktons and planktons and krill yet in the water. And those were going to be increasing in numbers throughout the summer season. And the best season to see whales in Antarctica or in the Southern Ocean is more like February, March timeframe, because the ocean is very rich in nutrients at that point, and the whales have moved more south to follow the nutrients. At the time we went in the springtime, there were more, it was still, yeah, the whales were still more in the northern latitudes closer to the equator. So we saw some, but not many.
Did you see any insects?
Not that I remember. We did see some algae, and let me go to that picture. So there's some snow algae, and some of this pink stuff here on the snow in the South Shetland Islands are snow algae. There must have been some insects in South Georgia, because I'm guessing those South Georgia pipits ate insects, but I don't exactly remember seeing anything offhand. Yeah, no, I don't remember. Sorry.
Maria, if I
Hey.
can jump in, I'm curious, how much daylight did you have being
Oh,
that
yeah.
far?
That's a good question. So when we were farthest south, we were about 65 degrees south. The sun was rising sometime between 4 and 4:30 in the morning and setting right around 10 p.m. at night. 66 degrees south is the Antarctic Circle. So we didn't quite make it to the Antarctic Circle, but we had a lot of daylight. And it was changing quickly too as we went up and down. We noticed big changes. In terms of temperature, so the coldest it ever got was right around 32 degrees. And then the day that you guys saw me jumping into the water was actually about 30 degrees because it's salt water. So it has a lower freezing point than just fresh water for that polar plunge. So, but it was generally around 32 degrees. You know, we weren't moving around a lot, but most people had on a backpack with a camera or something. And so you're walking some and you had on really good heavy coat and several layers of pants. So I actually was surprised. We didn't really get cold, which we were thankful for. I should have also mentioned, I'm thinking about backpacks. So we were not allowed to bring any type of food on the land. They were very strict about only keeping the food on the ship. And they said only people with absolute medical needs to have a snack on the land were allowed to bring a snack. And that was both because of a plastic wrapper issue and just not wanting to have any type of contamination onto the landings.
Okay, any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Maria. That was just great.
Thank